As the wheel of time turns and nations become increasingly interconnected by land, air, sea, and cyberspace, disputes ripple across regions. This is especially true in Europe, where new elections, treaties, and events will reshape the continent. So here's what we need to keep an eye out for in 2019. I'm your host Shirvan, and welcome to Caspian Report. Looking ahead at 2019, Italy sits at the heart of the Eurozone's stability. Its budget proposal for 2019 was met with sharp criticism by the European Commission because the Italians sought to spend far beyond their means, especially since Italy has more than $2.6 trillion in debt. Normally, this would be a domestic issue. However, since Italian banks hold about 375 billion euros in sovereign debt, of which a third is held by forces outside the country, Brussels is worried that a banking crisis in Italy could spread to other member states of the bloc. As a result, the leadership of the EU feels the need to step in. There is no telling how this will play out. The risk of a new financial crash is real. And what makes the ordeal even more troublesome is that the coalition government in Rome is split on the matter, which could result in early elections. At the very least, in 2019, the contest between Brussels and Rome will reach new heights. Beyond Italy, in May, elections will be held for the European Parliament, while in October, the EU member states will appoint a new president of the European Commission. In both events, pro-European factions are expected to retain control, but Eurosceptic and nationalist parties will follow suit. This divided political landscape will make it increasingly harder for the European Union to pass legislations and major reforms. Also, in October, the EU will select the new president of the European Central Bank. While South European nations like Italy, Spain, and Portugal want leadership that promotes higher spending and high-risk sharing, the northern nations want to see more fiscal responsibility in Frankfurt. Thus, overall, 2019 will be a year of significant renewal in the EU, with the bloc being divided between West and East, as well as North and South. Even more political uncertainty can be found in the talks concerning Brexit. The United Kingdom is scheduled to leave the European Union in March, and London is trying to soften its exit from the bloc by approving a comprehensive exit agreement. Prime Minister Theresa May has come under fire over the deal her administration reached with Brussels in November 2018. However, critics have presented no alternative plans. British lawmakers will vote on this matter in the coming year, which will set the terms of Brexit for once and for all. Whatever is decided, at the end of the day, the UK maintains close relations with several EU members, such as France, Germany, Poland, and the Netherlands. There are mechanisms in place to ensure that those ties endure, regardless of whether a deal is reached or not. Elsewhere in Europe, the traditional powers, Germany and France, will focus inwards. Chancellor Merkel has said her current term will be her last, and the ruling Christian Democratic Union Party has already elected a new leader. However, the party is split on its future political orientation, and its partner in the government coalition is undergoing an identity crisis, which could result in early elections in Germany. Meanwhile, in France, President Macron's institutional and economic reforms have backfired. Protests have erupted in Paris and other cities. In 2019, the French government will continue with its reforms as it seeks to revitalize the economy. Some of the reforms will succeed, but citizens will be increasingly vocal in their rejection of Macron's policies. Check out our reports on the Yellow Vest movement in France and Merkel's political exit for more information. In any case, as the political crisis in Berlin and the protests in Paris continue, the traditional powers will be distracted from external developments. Some of these external issues include ambitious designs, such as the plan to replace the dollar with the euro as the world's reserve currency, and the concept of a European military. Although discussions of such ideas will remain, with France and Germany distracted, the plans will not materialize in 2019. A more immediate external development revolves around the US tariffs for European-produced vehicles. At the present, vehicle-related trade accounts for approximately 10% of the total trade between the EU and the US. If President Trump introduces higher tariffs on European vehicles, then Europe is likely to respond in kind. This trade dispute will hurt the performance of German firms who manufacture 1 in every 3 vehicles in Europe. Yet, unlike popular belief, European officials will not ally with the Chinese against the Americans. The European bloc will work closely with China to maintain the operations of multilateral organizations such as the World Trade Organization, but their cooperation will end there. Europe has its own troubles with China, particularly Germany and France. Policymakers in Paris and Berlin do not appreciate Beijing's economic activity in their infrastructure and cyberspace sectors and have sought to exclude China out of the process. This has led to China's lawsuit against the European Union by using a World Trade Organization panel, where Beijing seeks to be treated as a market economy. That legal case is set to wrap up in 2019. Its outcome will have an impact on the trade dispute between the United States, China, and the European Union. However, since the EU is a bureaucracy that operates by a set of legislations and complex rules, the smaller nations in Europe, which welcome Chinese investments, are likely to lobby against the governments of Paris and Berlin. As a result, the European bloc's position will be ambiguous. On some issues, the EU will side with China, while on other issues it will ally with the US. Essentially, in 2019, the politics of the European Union will resemble a soap opera. Further east in Russia, Moscow will lock horns with Washington as the latter withdraws from the INF Treaty. Although it will take another year before the United States deploys intermediate-range missiles in the region, the fallout of the nuclear regime is likely to accelerate an arms race between the two powers. The build-up will be most visible in East Europe. In particular, Poland and Romania will lobby for greater military commitment from the United States. As the Americans deploy intermediate-range missiles in these countries, somewhere by 2020, Russia will add such assets in Kaliningrad and Crimea. Check out our report on the collapse of the nuclear arms regimes for more information on this topic. Another factor to keep an eye out for are the negotiations concerning the US military base in Poland. Construction on this base will not begin in 2019, but once it's up and running, it will change the existing field operations of NATO. In response, the Kremlin, which will feel increasingly threatened as the arms race heats up, is likely to strengthen its foothold in the former Soviet states through 2019 by asymmetric and conventional measures. This means a new Russian military base in Belarus, as President Lukashenko has hinted, but also increased cyberspace activity, covert operations, as well as attempts to intervene in national politics. For instance, the European elections in May 2019 will present the Kremlin with an opportunity to bolster the ranks of nationalist and Eurosceptic forces within the European bloc. France, Italy, and Hungary are particularly ripe for exploitation. In Ukraine, the stakes will be even higher. The Turk Stream and Nord Stream 2 pipelines are expected to be operational in 2019. These pipelines will physically connect Russia's supply lines of natural gas to the European Union and Turkey by circumventing the conventional routes through Ukraine. This will grant Moscow even greater leverage over Kiev. As for the war in eastern Ukraine, it will continue with no end in sight. Both sides are prepped up for a wider engagement, but the Russians are betting that Ukraine's dysfunctional state will bring much of the country back into its orbit. A full-fledged arms race between Moscow and Washington will also spill over into the Balkan nations of Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia. Basically, Russia will continue to do whatever it can to undermine the unity of NATO and the European Union, and in some countries those efforts will be successful. However, the Russian Federation will also face internal complications in 2019. A series of controversial economic reforms have been set in motion, such as the increase of the retirement age, the increase of value-added tax, a new tax on unhealthy consumer products, a new tax on the environment, a new tax on tourism and self-employment, and much more. These reforms are meant to increase the government's income, but it has generated a lot of backlash in the country as it hurts the pockets of ordinary people. Most of the tax reforms will take effect as of January, and Russian opposition parties will seize that opportunity to take their disapproval to the streets. Later, in September, Russia will also hold regional elections, but genuine opposition parties are not likely to gain parliamentary seats, since Moscow has ways to outsource disapproval to the government-friendly opposition groups such as the Liberal Democratic Party and the Communist Party. So, despite the anticipated social unrest, not much will happen to challenge the rule of Putin. Overall, 2019 promises to be a restless year for Europe. In the West, diplomatic and financial disputes will dominate the headlines, while in the East, the situation will largely be shaped by the aggravation of the American-Russian standoff. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. Credit goes to our community on Patreon for voting on this topic and enabling us to produce content like this. If you want to learn more or gain access to sources and other perks, visit patreon.com/Caspian Report. In any case, thank you for your patience and Sarol.